Hi and welcome. We are so glad you're here. This is the maiden voyage of Love Letters to the Future. I am Laura Faye Tenenbaum.
And I'm PJ Manney. We're here to talk about a few things about why we're here and why we hope you'll listen. We've been here before. We as a species, as a civilization, have experienced these times of incredible conflict, of existential crises, and intense polarization. And we have them because of the same reasons. This isn't a first time we've experienced technologies upsetting how society is arranged, or people hanging on to an old way of making sense of the world that isn't accurate anymore, and fighting the people who recognize where they are and where we're going as a new way of making sense of their world. So if I could help people see that, A, we do this, we as humans do this, and B, that the way forward is not just acknowledging it, but talking together in dialogue what these new ways of seeing the world are like, I think will go a long way to settling both society and ourselves.
I just want to validate that what PJ said is that our whole society is going through a really difficult, challenging time right now. And we all see it, and it's real. And I think what we're trying to do is give some framing and perspective, one, so that people don't feel alone, that we don't feel alone, and that we can understand we can understand this huge upheaval in context of the whole of humanity, and maybe have some hope for what happens next.
There are several times in our history where we've had these major challenges. The first big shift that we know of in the historical record is in what's called the Axial Age, which is the first millennia BCE. So we're talking starting about 3,000 years ago. This is the period where we came up with all of these laws and moral systems, what we ended up calling religions. But those religions were formed because we were trying to work out this massive technological paradigm shift, which was we had these tribal groups all over the world, and they were starting to coalesce into cities. They were leaving their agriculture, their subsistence agriculture behind, and they were moving into cities, and suddenly they had a job. But more importantly than all of that is, for the first time in their lives, they were dealing with people who were not of their own kin. The big question in the Axial Age was, how do you deal with a stranger? And we came up with this fundamental idea in every culture on the planet. This is what's so extraordinary.
All simultaneously came up with the same concepts, because all the humans were going from agrarian
and hunter-gatherer and all of this
hunter-gatherers, and then they're moving into cities, and so every culture came up with the same idea, kind of concepts at the same time.
The concept is what I call the metal rules. So there's the golden rule, the silver rule, and the platinum rule. And pretty much every culture on the planet has one or more of these in action. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. The silver rule, which you find originally in Judaism, do not do unto others that which you would not have them do unto you. So it's the negation, flip side. And then many indigenous cultures came up with do unto others that which they tell you to do unto them, meaning don't do things that you assume you know best. Ask the person who you're doing it to what they would like, which is, when you think about it, a classic first contact problem.
It is my favorite of all the
which
the
is
rules.
Why it's platinum.
Give the people what they want. Yes.
So all of these cultures came up with this reaction, which is, if you're dealing with a stranger, treat them well.
And chances are at that time they started with kill them or dominate them, because that was what was happening. And, similar to what's going on now, there was stress and anxiety and major problems and upheaval until
people started living by the rules that society agreed were going to be the best for society. Those rules, again, this is the period of the codification, meaning the writing down, of Judaism and Hinduism. It was the creation of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Western philosophy, meaning Plato, Aristotle, the Greeks, and of course was the birthing, just before the birthing of Christianity and Islam. So you're looking at a period of time which was so crucial to global history, where we came up with the rules of how we live, because that's all a religion really is. There is a spiritual dimension, of course, but really a lot of it is rules-based.
And a new value system too.
And they're not just deciding how you deal with yourselves and each other. They're also deciding how they see themselves within the cosmos, right? Like in the best senses possible, there's an outward facingness of, who am I in the sense of the cosmos, whether you see that as a god or whatever, universe, whatever. The next big shift, again, all about technologies, is what we call in the West the Enlightenment. Is also the period of scientific, political, and industrial revolutions. So again, a massive upheaval in society. Everything was changing. People were moving from the farms into the cities. Again, funny how that works.
In the industrial age, you're talking about
age,
like but 300 years ago, 300 years ago, late 1800s.
And the thing that underlaid that beforehand was the printing press. So you had this ability to share information in a way we never had before, quickly and widely. Literacy was the only stumbling block, which is why literacy became so important from that point on. During that time, it was less about what we do with the stranger and more about we were dealing with all of these social structures that were extremely domineering top-down, monarchy, religious, like the church. Think of Europe, the church. You saw an explosion of people saying, yeah, but how about how I feel about this? The divine right of kings, okay, whatever. Or, the Pope says this or whomever says that. Suddenly all these people were saying, but that, A, it isn't right, because they weren't always ethical decisions. And B, but what about me? So the individual became the primary concern versus the state or the religion or the populace. So all the stories we started telling were about the individual. We started writing novels. Novels are from a deeply individual standpoint. We started writing journalism, which is that person did this to that person. It wasn't about states or kings, or it wasn't about something outside themselves. It was about very personal individual stories. And that's actually what fueled especially these political revolutions of the 18th century and 19th century. Because people said, hey, but what about me? That's not right. I'm not just something to be stepped upon by authority. Here we had literacy, the printing press, and then all the machine age, all these, the dark satanic mills, and all the industrialization of the world.
All the inventions that came from the
Right.
industrialization of the modern world.
So that was a different kind of story. And we told stories to how do we deal with this new age, this new modern world. So now we're in this new period now. And this is the new big technological paradigm shift. And someday in the future...
And it started...
Well, it technically started 100 years
the
ago.
internet?
It really started about 100 years ago. And I say this only because it was the beginning of mass communications. In not the newspaper sense, the writing literacy sense, but in audio and visual. So suddenly we had movies and television and radio and telegraph and telephone, and we could talk to each other in a simultaneous sense. This changed how people behaved, how fast things happened, and the ability to share information to accelerate change, to accelerate knowledge, to accelerate growth.
And now, in the last 10, 15
The
years,
internet
the internet
was the cherry on top that changed everything. With the internet, we've completely upturned all the things we had assumptions about being human. So like we had these concepts of time and space, like if you wrote a letter, you put it in the mail, it took so much time to get to someone.
Sure. And what is the definition of here? What is the definition of
Right.
now? That's completely
Right.
changed.
So
Because we're all here together right now, and somebody in the future is going to be listening to this podcast, and we could say we're here together right now. So the idea of being here and now no longer exists in the same way that it
and
used to.
identity doesn't exist either, right? Here you have people who have avatars and play different roles online. You can present yourself in your social media presence as one version of yourself versus the real version of yourself. We have curated feeds. We have all of these things that are changing how we see ourselves as individuals, and also completely changing how we see ourselves in relationship to the people around us, our world, and again, the cosmos. Like, how do we see ourselves in relation to everything? When each of these times happen, massive conflict occurs because there are people who were really comfortable with the older story, the older way of making sense of the world. They struggle with seeing what's happening now, no less seeing what's coming in the future, because that's just not how they're oriented to think. And I really hope that this kind of thinking allows people to see that we're just part of this continuum of spikes of change and spikes of conflict with that change, where we do come up with solutions, but sometimes people have to really be pushed to the extreme before they're ready to address that.
Or else
Or else.
it takes a long enough time. If it takes 80 years for change to happen, the people who are the most recalcitrant and the most resistant end up not making it to the next generation. Like if you can think about it in any of those examples, if you were born into the new modern industrial revolution, you weren't necessarily holding or fighting or resisting against modernity. And that may end up being the case in this case, in which is part of the reason why we wanted to call this Love Letters to the Future, because it's a message in a bottle that we're casting out into the sea of time, regardless of if people listen to it now, or maybe people are going to listen to some of the meaning-making messages in 20 years, in 30 years, in 40 years, because we are thinking about the future. We're embracing the future. We're creating the world now that we would like to live in, because we're well aware that the old reality no longer exists. So we're in that precipice in the middle of the most kind of negative and intense and difficult space is also the most opportunity for growth. And the reality that gets created isn't random or accidental. We're the ones who get to create it. Us here now, are the guests that we have on the show, and the people who listen to the show, who hopefully become inspired by the guests and the topics that we're going to be discussing.
And generally, this is why we call this the new mythos, because every time this big paradigm shift happens, we create a new series of stories and myths, how we make sense of our world, how we see ourselves in relationship to everyone and everything.
It's weird saying the word we when I mean like all of humanity. You know, the dream that I have for humanity is that we start completely rearranging our value system. So we've been taught, for example, that more is better. And so we want more stuff, more materialism, and we've lost this sense of like deep inner relationship to ourselves and deep inner relationship to nature, for example. And the idea of what's really important: connection, relationship, mental health, physical health, being grounded, being centered. So many of those things is part of the future that we want. And like there's other things that I would hope for the future. Diversity, inclusivity, play, joy. So instead of more materialistic stuff, how about more play? How about more rest? Certainly rest is something that in humanity has really never been elevated, never been a value. What about peace and rest? Those are all just samplings of visions that I would hope for the future. And here's this big opportunity to like say, okay, what's really, really important to me now in this moment? What's really important to all of us now in this moment?
I think the way we create new meanings for ourselves and others really does start with yourself. I'm a big believer in finding your own sense of meaning and peace. Put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. You know, it's very hard to imagine helping everyone until you can really help yourself. And that's, you have to find meaning where you find it. But I also hope that when you find meaning, it's in a compassionate way that isn't at the expense of others, because it doesn't have to be. You know, one of the things I find so interesting is when people find meaning in the negative. And that's something we're seeing a lot right now, in that people are finding meaning.
Can you talk about that? Talk about that more. I always need examples. So what does
You got
finding
it.
meaning in the negative mean?
Finding meaning in the negative is finding meaning in the hate or the distance or the rejection.
Oh, you mean like a troll or a bully or something like that? Their life has meaning when they can make somebody else feel bad. But I would just push back and say that that's not real meaning. That's like a superficial meaning. That's like eating a bag of potato chips and pretending that you're satiated, when really it's just stuffing a craving rather than like a deep, deep meaning.
You've really hit on something, because what it is simply reactive. So when I say finding meaning in the negative, it's because somebody has fear, it's fear-based, and they're addressing that fear by acting out in a reactive way. And what I recognize profoundly is how terrifying this period is becoming. What I'm asking is not to react in fear against others, because it's very easy to fall into, it's all about me, it's not about them, because ultimately it's all about all of us. You know, we all are connected. We're all work together to make a society, a culture, a family, a community, etc. Without that sense of cohesion, social cohesion with each other, it's very hard for us to make meaningful change that is helpful. So that's why I say we really need to think seriously, each individual, about how much our behavior, we think we're doing something, but it's simply a fearful reaction to something we don't understand, we haven't put into a context, we don't get the bigger picture. It's very easy to act out, as opposed to try to settle yourself first and then look with as clear eyes as possible at the entire situation and see, how can I help?
I think I'm just going to jump in and say it's related to what I said about rest, because as we get swept along in the speed of the current of all these modern technologies, our nervous system is revved up.
Yep.
And when you were talking, PJ, about that fear, instead of reacting to the fear, it's like stepping back, breathing, evaluating. Is this really a snake that's going to bite me? Or maybe it's just a snake that is slithering off on its own and isn't going to bite me at all. So I don't have to react to every little thing that's coming at me. But yeah, a lot of it is all this, every single time that we've gone through one of these extreme events, let's just call it that, our human nervous system just gets riled up. So how do we pull back? You know, we have this big frontal lobe, but we're basically just a big lizard in our endocrine system that is super jumpy. Yeah, how do we take this opportunity where we know the truth about that, right? We understand enough about our neurophysiology to be like, oh, right. I don't have to be so reactive to everything. And how do I value calmness? How do I value patience in this time of speed?
I utterly agree. And then from that point, you join in community with others to come up with solutions. And we tell those solutions in stories. Like, that's the whole point, is when we can make sense of things. the answers to how to proceed next get communicated in story, because that's
Let's
just how
talk
we
a little
communicate.
bit more about that because okay, so both PJ and I, we would call ourselves storytellers, and we use this term narrative, right? So why? And the reason why narrative storytelling works is because as humans, part of our who we are as people is we like the idea of a protagonist that has a story. We're wired for listening to stories, relating to stories, fables, that sort of thing. And they give us meaning, which is why we like reading books and watching movies and all the different things that we're attracted to. It's a way that people remember things better. If you have a story arc where something happens and somebody goes on a journey and they learn something in the end, because we understand that communication is more successful when there's a narrative, when there's a story, we want to use that truth to disseminate information better. So that's why we kind of use the term narrative and storytelling, because that's what people are. We're natural born storytellers, just like we're natural born scientists. That's how we are wired as human people.
That's right. That's right. We are homo narrative. Sapiens, which means wisdom. I don't know how much sometimes, but certainly homo narrative.
We're human people. We're story people. I know, but PJ likes the big words, and I like to be silly and just say we're human people, storytelling people. Homo.
In my own genre, which is speculative fiction, there's a huge custom we have about call and response in our stories. So someone will write a story. Let's say Ursula Le Guin writes The People Who Walked Away from Omelas. And then generations of writers after her write stories in response to her story. Now, that's not just in my subgenre. There's tons of literature that somebody wrote something and then somebody else wrote something as a response to that thing. And it's extraordinary how much of classic literature is literally someone's response to somebody else's literature before them.
And so, art and music.
Art, exactly.
Oh my
everything,
gosh, yes.
Everything.
So, all the genres.
So we're in this constant conversation culturally. Science is the same way. Someone in science speculates.
It's mandatory.
Exactly. A hypothesis. They do an experiment. Somebody else goes, I don't know if they did that experiment right. Let me try it this way. And there's
Let me contribute. Let me add. Let me take, stand on the shoulders of the person
of
who
the
went
giants
before me,
exactly. Thank you, Newton. That's a classic way culture is created. And then it's the simultaneous conversations at this, in each discipline. So everyone who does a thing talks to other people who do the same thing. And we're having these conversations in real time, not just across periods of time, but at the same time. So for instance, the way I came up with this idea of the new mythos was in a science fiction convention. I was sitting on a panel with other writers and a publisher talking about political science fiction and how it changes what we write in fantasy and science fiction. And I had the epiphany. Literally top of my head opened up and I was like, oh my God, I'm speaking in tongues.
In front of people
in front
on
of
a stage.
Right. Like, crazy. What happened in the room was utterly electric because everybody was on the same page. They got it. They saw the thing. And from that moment on, we started having conversations about what is a new mythos? How do we create it? What could it encompass? How is it made? What's missing? What has to be continued through? And we've been doing this for the last 7-8 years. Just writers
and we're going to bring all those people onto this show,
right,
which is part of the creation process. Think about the Impressionists in France. They were kind of living together. They were talking to each other. They inspired each other. And we're efforting to make a community of thinkers, actors, doers, artists, storytellers, visionaries through this podcast as a home for that. And we're not the only ones, certainly, but we're welcoming people from across all sorts of expertise to participate and, see the world in a new way, in a similar way that different artists have come together in the past to express and see the world in a new way, influenced and influencing each other.
And my epiphany wasn't unique to me. There were many people having similar feelings at the same time, and there isn't a discipline that Laura and I have talked to someone in where they don't go, well, I think the same thing about physics, or I think the same thing about sociology, or I think the same thing about history. There isn't a discipline where people aren't feeling the same impetus. They're just not seeing the big picture that everyone is experiencing it together, because we are all sharing this period of time where everything is changing. The willingness for us to have these conversations allows others to feel, A, I wasn't crazy. This is actually happening.
Yeah,
And
it's real.
It's real.
It's valid.
This is so real. And B, how can we help each other tell our stories, our sense making in a better way that helps everyone, no matter what your discipline is?
Exactly. Instead of hurting people. You said A, B, and C. C is to not feel alone. Because, I mean, loneliness is humans are not lonely. Humans are people. We want to be together. And I think part of that you were talking about earlier, that lashing out. There's a deep lack of feeling of what is it like to be together? What is it like to feel love? What is it like to feel understood? What is it like to feel seen? And
Yes.
how do we tell stories or put values forth where that we don't have this competition? I'm better than you, I'm over you, I'm the winner, you're the loser. That's an older story. Exactly. That hurts people. So that's just one example of an old story where winner has to be conqueror, loser. And how do we tell a story that's, again, inclusive, where somebody doesn't have to feel down and left out? That's going to be the origin of them lashing out in the first place.
Correct.
So that's just one example.
I'd like to have conversations about how do we communicate? How do we think? How do we see ourselves in this giant collective consciousness that we've created, whether people realize technology has created it for us or not? It's not an airy-fairy concept anymore. We're actually right now talking on a piece of this giant collective consciousness.
There's so many themes that I'd like to cover. Everything from human rights, it's huge, feminism, environmental justice, the environment in general, nature. The impacts of climate change are going to increase. And it is 100% clear that there's going to be increasing migration due to the fact that some places are going to be unlivable. And that's certainly impacting what we're going to see in the future and how people are going to either live with or against the environment and nature.
I think we need to accept the fact that migration is a part of the human experience.
Many population experts predict that 9 billion is going to peak in human population, and then it's going to start to go lower. So, I mean, population is just a huge and super fraught topic. There's already globally been a downturn in the amount of children each woman wants to have. It has to do with the value system and the stories we tell ourselves about women and childbearing, and what the role of women is and what the role of childbearing is. And
you can look at the world and go, yeah, you know what, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. But at the same time, realize that we're here, we love people, we love what we do, and let's embrace working together to make things better for everyone. I would love people to find meaning. Like, to me, that's a huge part of what this show will be about. Humans need the same things. We need companionship and love. We need shelter and food. We need community in the bigger sense of understanding that there's a place for us.
I think people need to be understood. Once you have a place to live and enough food, after those two things, your basic survival stuff.
Maslow's lowest level of yes, exactly.
Basic survival. Well, there's some people who say that Maslow's a famous
Abraham
psychologist. He had a pyramid of hierarchy needs, and there's some people who say that it should be upside down, that the self-fulfillment is the highest need, and that maybe that should be
the most fundamental.
Fundamental, the most core need.
It's what grounds us.
PJ and I have known each other for 10, 15 years. She reached out to a handful of friends and said, I want to do a podcast. Does anybody want to co-host it with me? And I raised my hand knowing without a shadow of a doubt that I would be the perfect co-host. So I just have to give PJ like 100% of the credit for coming up with this idea. But I mean, we are the perfect co-hosts together. She needed me. She really did need me, and yeah, we bounce off each other really well. She was looking for somebody who writes nonfiction because she writes fiction, so that's a complementary thing.
And also someone whose specialty is science. While I can get really heady and esoteric and obscure and up my own ass sometimes,
I pull her down to earth, and you let me pull you down to earth.
Absolutely.
Not everybody would.
I think we share a value in communication to not take ourselves so seriously. Like, this is serious stuff we're talking about, but also we don't want to forget the joy.
What gives people meaning is making things, and we want to make something, and certainly making things together is fun. It's the most fun to make things together and to share them. So we're making things together. We're sharing them with the world.
And we're having all these really cool people come on the show. We have Jaime Cassio, one of the world's most famous and important futurists, talking about how we frame our world. We have Nisi Shaw, head of Writing the Other. We have Henry Lien, who discusses why Asian storytelling structure may be the thing that saves us in the new mythos. We have Brian Swim and Monica Derasp Bowles talking about this big thing called the noosphere, which is actually the global brain that we're all grappling with. We have Greg Dember talking about metamodernism and why all the coolest shows and movies and music and books are all actually in this new form called metamodern.
The whole point that I love being on camera is that it forces me to connect. And connection is the most interesting, hardest thing that there is.
That's right.
Because you could spin out in your own little head for a long, long time, and then nobody gives a shit. And even you don't give a shit after a while. But to slow down, to lean in, to see, am I clear? Am I landing? Is what I'm saying reaching the audience? And it makes me focus, and it makes me present like nothing else. And that's why I love it so much, and it's so important.
And I love having a show like this because I want to meet all these people. I'm just the biggest sponge imaginable.
We're all going to learn a bunch of stuff together.
We sure are.
You, me, the audience, all of us.
I truly believe that there's so many people with a piece of life's puzzle.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Substack, YouTube. Like us, subscribe, and come back next time for more cool shit, bitches. Meow. Piper, would you like to be on the show? Piper wants to be on the show. Piper wants to lick my face. We will see you soon.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you so much.